Wow. I did not believe I'd have that much fun and spend that much money at the local drag show that I attended at Scooter's Bar in Eau Claire. As a heterosexual male, a drag show was never something that crossed my mind or was interested in for a fun night out. I don't care who you are, if you like to have fun, if you like high energy, and if you admire beautiful women, I strongly suggest attending a drag show. Unfortunately, when people are faced with an unfamiliar culture like drag, discomfort can come from not knowing how to communicate properly. In my speech, I will talk about the drag show itself, the identities of these drag and how they prefer to be addressed, how drag shows can be a great time for anyone, and the similarity and differences between heterosexuals and drag. This brings me to the description of the drag show that I attended. Numerous drag queens dressed up and performed and entertained the audience to a song of their choosing. So these were all males who were perceiving or presenting themselves as females. One by one would come up onto the stage, kind of looking like the artist who was singing their song, and they would perform for all of us. They would dance, they would lip sing, they would run around, they would do anything that they could do to get a rise out of the audience. My role was an observer. I was someone who was being entertained by all of these performers. After talking with one of the drag queens, Wes, I was able to determine how the performers like to be addressed. So now I'd like to talk about their identities and preferred pronouns. Wes told me, or otherwise known as Siren is his drag name, or her drag name, my apologies. Queens are males who present themselves as women and prefer to be addressed as such. Now this goes doubly for women. Drag kings are women who present themselves as males and would prefer to be addressed as such. The book that we used for class, Understanding Human Communication by Ronald Adler and al., who attended Santa Barbara City College, helped me determine that this is a cooperative culture. The gender norms are completely thrown out the window. They generally emphasize equality, relationships, group consensus building. They want to grow their culture. They don't want it to minimize. They don't, compete with one another in that sense. We'll talk about competing later, but for the most part, they are very much a cooperative culture. What I did to participate was throw myself right into the middle of all of it. I was right in the front row with my girlfriend, and we looked around at everyone else and just tried to fit in. It wasn't very hard after the first two performers to kind of figure out how to be an audience member at a drag show. How the difference between our cultures affected my time there was not very much. Like I said before, when I was there after the first two performers, I was able to kind of feel out how to be there, how to interact with these performers and the audience around me. Many people were giving these performers dollar bills not to give them a lap dance or anything like that, but they were tipping them for entertaining them. And they did a great job, let me tell you. How my communication competency was increased. I was able to figure out how to address a lot of these drags. And that's something that really, really kind of helps me when I want to talk to someone. This kind of helps me for the future whenever I want to talk to someone who maybe is dressed up in drag. I know how to address them, and I know what kind of pronouns they would most likely prefer. Now I would like to talk about how I perceived the event. Emotionally, it was great. I had a phenomenal time. Not one bad thought comes to mind when I think about the event that I attended. Everyone around me was having a great time clapping or shouting or dancing or singing. It was a great time emotionally and intellectually as well. I learned all that goes into something like this. Dressing up in drag is not easy. It's not cheap. It's very expensive, which is one of the reasons why so many people like to tip these drag performers. Now I would like to talk about the similarities and differences between heterosexuals and drag. some of the similarities come from the competitiveness, I must say. Um, Victor Ferraru, who posted an article in August of 2013 for the Huffington Post, wrote about a very famous drag queen named Paisley, who, when she was competing in certain drag queen events, um, certain drag queens would throw some glass shards into her powder, or they would throw super glue on their dress. This is all because they had that competitive drive to win, and that's something that I very much see in just people alone, but very much in my culture too, in just heterosexuals. In myself, I'm very competitive. My girlfriend, she's very competitive. Heterosexuals, very competitive people, but that's not saying everybody is. One of the similarities, though. Many differences, though. The attire, for one. A heterosexual male and a male dressing up as a drag queen obviously have the opposite clothing. But if you're looking at a drag queen and a heterosexual female, they're very similar because they try to dress the same. So you have to kind of look at it if you're going to look at a drag queen and a heterosexual female, or if you're going to look at it as a drag queen and a heterosexual male. One thing I learned about my culture after attending this event was that my own culture seems to be too judgmental of others. For instance, we like to write other cultures off or other events off. And this is something that I wish we would get away from, I think, because I did not see more than maybe 2 or 3 heterosexuals at that event. Yes. So after observing the culture and my own, I hope to have more positive experiences with these shows and queens themselves. So again, when people are faced with an unfamiliar culture, discomfort can come from not knowing how to communicate properly. We talked about the drag show itself, how queens prefer to be addressed, and how drag shows can be a great time for anyone, and lastly, the similarities and differences between all of the above cultures. In closing, I recommend to everyone to go out and experience a show for themselves. It's a fun, jubilating time that allows us to experience something we may not know much about. Much hard work goes into performing at these shows, so please remember to tip your performers.